Hi everyone, we have results. We're getting to the exciting part of the night. The first House seat of the night to flip from Republicans to Democrats has happened in Virginia 10, where Jennifer Wexton has beaten Barbara Comstock. We'll break down the details of that shortly for you. Welcome back to our election night coverage on Now This. I'm Versha Sharma, and I am joined by a panel of really smart people to talk us through the latest results. Joining me is Carrie Twigg, a cultural strategist, Carolyn Fiddler, the communication director at Daily Kos, and David Rothschild, a pollster and the founder of PredictWise. So Virginia 10, why is looking at this one House seat a big deal? Why is it important?
Well, Virginia 10 went for Hillary Clinton last time around, and this was a seat that Democrats absolutely needed to flip to have any hope of tonight being a good night for them. And they flipped it, and it's a very positive sign. And
Republicans poured a lot of money into that race, from what I understand. I think it was millions and millions of dollars.
They did indeed. The numbers there showed them, just like it showed Democrats, it was a good opportunity for a Democratic pickup. It showed them it was certainly a long shot to keep for them. And they were just unable to do it. That media market's also very expensive. It's DC. So.
Yeah, exactly.
And Comstock was one of the NRA's top 10 recipients of campaign contributions, so her losing is also a boon for people who have been doing political organizing around gun reform the last several years. So that's very encouraging.
That's an important point, and I think that's been a big issue, I know, for the Now This audience. And just to remind you guys, if you're just tuning in, we do have teams across the country, including a field team in Parkland, Florida, who are going to be watching the results tonight with a lot of the teenagers and students who registered to vote for the first time this year, and a lot of them got to do it for the first time today, which is exciting. And obviously gun reform is a huge issue for them. So David, why don't we go to our magical whiteboard over here and see what is actually happening? What are the latest updates?
Well, you guys were just pointing out is Virginia 10th. We're seeing Donna Shalala getting called down in Florida as well. These are districts that the Democrats needed to have in order to win. These are ones that we were in somewhere around the very likely to lean Democratic. They're all starting to push Democratic, and this is where you see this number coming up here. We now have the Democrats at 85% or so to carry the House, to take back the House, because what we're seeing is all of this is coming in strong for the Democrats, and they're seeing good numbers in the toss-up. So, you know, Kentucky has a toss-up race that's actually leaning a little Republican right now, but then you have Dave Bratt in the Virginia 7th, and that's about 50-50 right now. So as these toss-ups start actually coming in toss-up, that's actually a real good sign for the Democrats, especially since they're sweeping through here, and some of these lean districts are actually looking pretty tight. And so we have the Democrats at about 85% to take the House right now, and that's, you know, remember Hillary Clinton was at 90% for a lot of numbers, so we want to be very clear.
Exactly. We're all saying we're not calling anything until it's actually called, but this is where things stand.
Too soon.
The Senate, too soon, yes. The Senate's tricky, so we're seeing a couple of things move. So we saw Florida move from a toss-up into, it's looking pretty good for the Democrats right now. You add in New Jersey, West Virginia, Montana, and Nevada, which all look pretty good, and we'll see how they come in. You're looking at the Democrats right now being very strong in about 47 seats, and the Republicans, where it looks like they're looking pretty strong in Mississippi and North Dakota, and Tennessee and Texas are ones the Democrats wanted, and Indiana's looking pretty strong right now as a flip for the Republicans to take that seat. And so with Missouri and Arizona really as toss-ups still, you're looking at something like 47-51 right now as a kind of where we're at for very strong leaning. These things could change. These are not guaranteed seats. Remember, obviously, 50 seats is all the Republicans need in order to hold the Senate because they have the VP slot. We've also seen some movements on the gubernatorial board here. GILLUM is looking extremely strong down in Florida, and we think that's a pretty strong pickup right now for the Democrats, as well as Cordray in Ohio is looking extremely strong. As you move these up the boards, these are all pickups. So we're looking at 6 extremely strong ones for the Democrats right now, and another 4 or another 6 in play. So it looks like it could be a very good night for the Democrats when it comes to the gubernatorial races.
So Florida is obviously really interesting because Andrew Gillum could make history as the first black governor of Florida. And this is something, when just like reading the prep, it still blows my mind that America has only ever had 4 black governors. That statistic just seems crazy to me, but that's the reality.
And not a black woman.
And,
so Stacey Abrams
never
would
a
be
black
the first
woman
black woman to ever be
in
elected.
history.
Yeah.
Exactly. So those are races that we're obviously watching very closely. So Gillum seems to have a pretty strong lead right now. He seems to have a stronger lead than even Nelson has for the Senate race down there.
That's right. They're both looking very good, but the early numbers are also coming from Georgia, and that's not looking as good for Stacey Abrams. And it's one thing to say that these are the potential groundbreaking African-American governors, but race wasn't just a sideline here. It was the issue in both the Florida and Georgia races, and so it is definitely amazing that is still what we're talking about in 2018.
Well, speaking of Florida, another fascinating thing on the ballot down there is a ballot measure that would restore voting eligibility to 1.4 million.
Yeah.
Yes.
Former felons who have served their sentences, done all their time, but are permanently barred from voting in the state. This would let them be able to register and vote.
That would be huge.
That's a lot of humans who are not able to vote.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if that passes, and right now only about 10%'s in, and there's a 60% threshold in Florida as well for a ballot measure to pass. But if it passes, it will change the electorate in Florida drastically from here on out.
Yeah, and that's something that would go into effect immediately if it passes.
Before the next election.
For the next election, absolutely. So the other interesting thing about Georgia, I just saw this, so I mean, we have to talk about it. We've been talking about the voter suppression and intimidation that's been going on in that race, of course, with Brian Kemp being the guy who oversees that election, but running for governor. So there was a headline in The Hill that said, according to a local TV affiliate, he himself had trouble voting. He went to get his voter card and it was incorrect and he had to go get a new one before he could actually vote. And it's like your own system. You were vested by your own system.
Right. I mean, he's lost several judicial decisions around the fact that the protocols that he has put in place are so onerous that they just can't reasonably be met. And so the fact that it's now coming to fruition for him is hilarious.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, obviously, we know that a lot of these policies are put into place to largely discourage minority voters from voting.
Absolutely.
But when you're a white guy and the Secretary of State and you're also being affected by these crazy restrictions that are in place, I mean, maybe it's time to
He played himself.
Yeah, he played himself. Exactly. So, Carrie, you had mentioned some other races that you're looking closely at in the Midwest. So I think we should be getting results for those soon.
Yeah, so I mean, it's past 8. So my home state of Ohio, I have to rep it all the time. So David went over some of the races that are happening there. In addition to the governor, Rich Cordray, 5-time Jeopardy winner, but was also the fun fact, but was also an Obama administration appointee and had served in other offices in Ohio. He's going up against Mike DeWine, a very conservative, longtime politician in Ohio, so that will be very fascinating. But I'm also looking at the Secretary of State's race there, Kathleen Clyde, and the auditor's race, because those 3 of those offices, the governor, Secretary of State, and auditor, make up the apportionment board, the executive offices in Ohio, and those are who draw the lines once redistricting happens. So I will be harping on that all night as something we need to be really thoughtful about so that our actual vote totals reflect the people that we're able to elect into office.
Exactly, and I think that's an important point because no matter what happens tonight, whether Democrats do take the House, whether things stay the same or Republicans get even more pickups than people are expecting, the fight is not over for people or for activists or just for voters to have their votes counted. The next big step is thinking about how we do fair redistricting.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's why one of the reasons I'll be keeping a close eye on state legislative results as they come in over the course of the night, because in 37 states, state legislators are the ones with their hands on the map drawing pens, so to speak. So.
Yeah, I think that's a point that just a lot of people don't know. It's like as you get further down the ballot, of course, you tend to know less and less about what those races actually are.
Right.
But as you said, those are the people who really have a lot of the power.
So much power. They have a huge impact on who controls Congress for an entire decade.
Yeah.
And that's on top of the policies that just fly through legislatures, like a ton of abortion restrictions since 2010. Voting rights impediments have been very popular among GOP state legislatures. So having Democrats in places in a position to reverse those giving them majorities in some of these state legislative chambers after tonight would be a huge step in the right direction.
Yeah, so speaking of that, this is something interesting that just came through. It looks like the Georgia NAACP just won a lawsuit, and voting times are going to be extended in a couple precincts in Georgia by 3 hours. So instead of polls in Georgia normally close at 7 p.m. Eastern, polls in these key precincts are going to be open now until 10 p.m. Eastern. So, I mean, that's really interesting, like literally breaking news as we're live, lawsuits being filed as people are going to the polls, and it's great to see that they've extended the time for some of those people.
That's hugely significant. I don't know exactly where. Let's see.
It says near Spelman and Morehouse, so near historically black universities.
I mean, that's hugely, hugely significant, particularly for Stacey Abrams, as we were talking, who has the opportunity to not only be the first elected black female governor in the country, but also by going up against a sitting Secretary of State who has worked so hard to constrict the number of people who are able to vote.
Exactly.
And
that is a huge
to win
win.
that sort of decision on election days is incredible.
That's amazing. So
it's really encouraging.
We already knew that it was going to be a long night and that we might be here for a while, but if some of these precincts are going to be open till 10 now, that gives us a little bit more of an indication of how long we might be waiting for Georgia results.
Yes. Sorry, I've been following the numbers in Florida. I would say that it is looking tighter than I would said a few minutes ago.
Oh, really? It's tight
numbers
now.
come out, some of the western part of the state, and so just a good reminder that until we put them up on the board as final,
yes,
that there's a lot of movement that we'll see as these numbers come through. And that's both in the governor's races and on the Senate races.
Right, that's the panhandle, a very GOP-leaning part of the state.
That's right, and so as some of these numbers come in, they're making things look tighter. I also, I think we've been talking a lot about voting rights. It's also important to stress some of the issues that have been driving some of the voting, and we've seen some of this in the earlier polling. We're seeing it in some of the exit polling. In Florida 26, which is looking pretty good for the Democrats right now, gun rights was a major issue, and that was a location where you actually had a candidate really pushing very heavily on progressive gun positions, and it looks like she's doing quite well based off that. And so healthcare is one we talked about earlier today, and that's been very important for the Democrats. They pushed it very hard. Gun rights as well. Well, I guess having gun control, as it were, has been an issue that's also made it up there in a way that it has not in most recent elections.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you guys are just tuning in, we are going to be live every hour for pretty much the rest of the night. We'll see how long this goes, just to bring you whatever the latest results are, answer your questions, break down what we're seeing in some of these key races. So let us know what your questions are in the comments. You can find us right here on NowThis. We're also live on YouTube and Twitter as well. So if you want to go back and watch the 6 p.m. and 7 p.m. panels, we have those discussions for you as well. Any final thoughts as we kind of wrap up?
Michigan has closed. I'm watching that one very closely. I think the Michigan State House is a real kind of sleeper chamber this cycle in terms of a place where Democrats could potentially flip that legislature. And with a Democratic governor in place, that would really change the policies that we're seeing coming out of Michigan.
I think the most important thing is to always keep perspective that we have elections in order to change policy, and we'll see kind of how different policies have been pushed or not pushed by different candidates and see if that's anything we can learn from that. But at the end of the day, it's a very binary question if the Democrats can take the House or the Senate, and most likely their best opportunities in the House, and that's going to make a lot of very big differences. 218 is very different than 217, so we'll be keeping a very close eye on that. Yeah,
and in addition to Stacey and the Honorable Stacey Abrams, excuse me, and Andrew Gillum, there's so many other firsts, and there's so many other people who are either first or among the first around the country. So they will be very interesting to see what actually unfolds with some of those races around the country, some in the Midwest and some elsewhere. And a lot of the really significant ballot initiatives, like you brought up in Florida, have yet to be decided. And I think one of the things that's so important that we have this heightened consciousness around, ideally, it feels as though, at least in kind of popular culture, we have a heightened consciousness around politics and voting. It'll be really interesting to see if folks are able to, if this doesn't work out and they don't get the first that the race that they sort of had their hopes on or that animated them into the space doesn't go their way, if they're going to be able to understand the duration of this process, that it's a marathon, that it does take a long time, that progress isn't a straight line, all of those things.
Yes, absolutely.
So, I mean, there's a lot of open questions tonight won't be the end of any discussion. You know, it's going
Yes.
to be the beginning of what's going to unfold over the next couple of years.
Of a lot more. I think
Decades.
Decades. The first is a really good reminder. That's actually been an important part of NowThis coverage. We've been running a live stream all day on what some of those historic firsts are, and we'll be live tweeting results as they're coming in of what those actually historic firsts are happening. Again, that's Democrat, that's Republican, that's across the board. So we'll be paying close attention to all of that.
Absolutely.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Make sure to tune back in at 9 p.m. Eastern. We'll be live again with these great guests and discussing even more results that will be coming in by then. So thanks for watching.